What's next for a neighborhood under siege? We'll have to wait and see. Reporting live, Sadie Sinclair, Channel 7 News.
Keith McHenry helped to start Food Not Bombs back in the 1980s. Food Not Bombs is an anarchist, anti-capitalist, anti-war project with a mission that is so simple: serve free food to people who need it. The response from the state was to arrest Keith many times. He's been arrested 100 times in his lifetime. At one point, the FBI even labeled Food Not Bombs a domestic terror group. Keith and I do not agree on everything, specifically around COVID, but it was super interesting hearing about the origins of organizations like Food Not Bombs, Homes Not Jails, which focuses on squatting, co-founding that, as well as writing the 2015 version of the Anarchist Cookbook. Keith continues to work on Food Not Bombs, including in Santa Cruz, where he lives now. Really quick, want to say thank you to everyone who's supporting the podcast at patreon.com/sadfrancisco. If you're not already signed up, please go there and throw down $5 a month or more and help support this independent media project. Wanted to start with asking, like, if there were moments or people who influenced your politics growing up.
Yeah, so I think both my grandfathers did. And my father's father, he lived with the Hopi in the 30s in Old Arribe. So when I lived at the Grand Canyon, I grew up in the park. So when I was in the first and second grade, he would take the family out to meet his friends. And I saw the snake dance in its original form, and the green corn dances, and I met all the other young 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds that lived in America's oldest community. Been there for 4,000 years. And there was also at that same time we would go and have lunch in what was this new town called Page on the edge of the Glen Canyon. And we'd watch them pour concrete for the dam. And we went all under the area where the water, Lake Powell, eventually flooded and everything, and saw the beautiful things. So that was that when I was in high school. Well, I'm going to go a little chronological there. So then we moved to Shenandoah National Park later on, and my dad gave me Walden by Thoreau. And I had dyslexia, and I just had learned to read, and this would be the 5th grade. And I read, because I'd never read an adult book yet, I read On the Duty to Civil Disobedience in the back of the Penguin edition, paperback edition of Walden first, before I read Walden. And that's how I got basically the anarchist philosophy. So in a certain sense, I would be a Henry David Thoreau anarchist. And what that was the Mexican-American War was happening, and the battle over slavery was happening, and this was before the Civil War, right before it. And he lived in Concord, Massachusetts, and my mom's side of the family's from Boston. And so I'd been to Concord and stuff as a kid as well. And so I was because he says a government that governs least governs best, I think is the quote, or I might have mangled it, but that's roughly the concept. Okay. And he went to jail to pay the poll tax because he said it went to fund the war against Mexico and to prop up slavery. And then I think it was Emerson bailed him out, and he was very mad at Emerson, but he wrote this essay, which has influenced a lot of people over the years. Oh, military helicopter is going over me. Anyway, it might be a dangerous podcast. So anyway, what happened with that was that man, that's loud.
Sounds okay on this end.
It's intense, man. I've never heard a helicopter like that here. So hope we're not in war. So anyway, back to the story. So other people I later found out that were influenced by that were Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. That was the pivotal essay that influenced them to do nonviolent direct action and nonviolent civil disobedience. So that was one influence. And then the other is that when I was at that growing up, my other grandfather was in the Office of Strategic Services, which became the CIA. And he was actually in the Army intelligence, apparently, or somehow connected to it right before World War II, because he was involved in helping set up Pearl Harbor. And he told me as a child, he died when I was 14, and he would tell me that they had to do that because otherwise Americans wouldn't go to war in the Pacific. But I also saw him argue over the phone with Curtis LeMay and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara to drop the atomic bomb on Hanoi, to send a message to the communists. And he was the two other things that he said he did when he was stationed in Burma during World War II was he led the most deadly bombing campaign in world history called Operation Meeting House, which was the firebombing of Tokyo. And then he also set up a heroin distribution network to the Black community in the United States, exporting heroin or opium out of Burma during World War II. And the purpose of that was to put down the Black community in case they revolted, with the GI Bill being one version for white people and one version for Black people. So they knew there would be a big problem when that happened. So they wanted to flood the Black community with heroin so they would all fight over that and be busy with that and not busy trying to get equal rights.
Obviously we have all of the documents from the government. We have like so many oral histories about these moments in history that people think of, maybe looking back, they're like, oh, this was a conspiracy. And now it's, incontrovertible. But at the time when you're like fielding this information, what do you do with it? Like, given that the mainstream narrative is kind of pushing you towards a place where you're keeping it all inside. Everything's kept secret because at that point in time, it wasn't as widely known that these things were happening.
Yeah, I mean, for me, because I was born in 1957, and my grandfather was my mom's dad, and he was teaching me carefully and gently how to become a spook. And his assumption is that I would, because he was a eugenicist, and the reason I would get to be a spook is because I was of a good bloodline. When he died, I went to his funeral. I spent the last summer with him at his house in Needham, Massachusetts. And then when he passed away my freshman year in high school, I went to his second wife, had a funeral, and I remember being so angry at the pastor for saying that he was a good godly person, because he had explained there's no God and that he was in a satanic organization, and you had to, and it was white man's burden. We had to, we would determine who died and who lived, and the people we were killing, they'd have no moral qualms. They're just getting killed. And he's telling me this from the age of 5, age of 6, all the way till I'm 14, right? And this is real politic. And then my other grandfather, and they were bombing from B-29 bombers at 25,000 feet above Tokyo, right? And he took 63 black and white photos of the firebombing of Tokyo, and he put them on his framed them, and they were in the wall of his den where he's arguing with McNamara and LeMay. And LeMay at the time was plotting a bombing of a mall in Miami to blame on Castro. So that's my world. And but when you know nothing else, that's what I just assume that's how everything works. So it was not a shock what was happening. It was just, okay, this is how society works. And that's just the way society works. My other grandfather, oddly enough, was older, and he was a medic, the opposite kind of person to directing the largest bombing campaign in world history. He was a medic in the trenches in Belgium during World War I. And so he was actually underground. He was below the surface of the earth being chemically attacked by the Germans and seen some of the most ghastly stuff in the world. But he shared none of that with me. So then but he becomes a national park and works at Grand Canyon. That's why he was with the Hopi. He was driving to be the first junior park ranger at the Grand Canyon when he crashed. and some Hopi farmers brought him to Old Arribe, and then he convalesced there. And he's the only person to take a photo of an active kiva. So he was teaching me the Latin names of all the plants at the canyon, and how to build fires and the stars. And he's the one that set up Yavapai Nature Center on the South Rim. And actually, his 70th birthday was held in the lodge that just burned down on the North Rim. And it was tragic to see that, because I remember going to his 70th birthday and thinking, what a wonderful, it was so much fun. My brother and I pretended like we were cowboys outside and everything like that. And the view was just amazing. And my grandfather lived on the North Rim for a while, and he lived on the South Rim. And so he grew up in national parks. And then the Hopi thing was so important, because then years later, and other things too, the Havasu, I was before that got commercialized, I was at Havasu. I was on like Walpi and Second Mesa and First Mesa, Third Mesa. I saw all this spiritual cosmic stuff that was going on. Like I stood on the end at Walpi, above 200, maybe 300 feet above the graveyard where people have been buried for centuries, for 4,000, maybe only 2,000 years there. But you could feel the spirits coming up off the ground from just standing there. And I'm looking at the golden sun that's setting. I knew the Grand Canyon was past there, but I couldn't really see it from the mesa. But it was just this amazing spirit experience. So then what solidifies my dedication to the rest of my life to being a revolutionary was Park Service kids in those days were sent away to Wasatch Academy in Utah. No park kid would ever be able to afford to go there now. It's more expensive than Stanford when it eventually privatized. But at the time, it was a Presbyterian boarding school for people that lived in rural America and had no access to high schools. So roughly a third of us were Ranger kids. A third were juvenile delinquents from California that were sent court ordered there. And then another third were just actual people that just wanted to go to that school. And that was in the 70s. That was 1970 when I went there. So about 72 or 73, I'm up on top of the Wasatch Mountains, and I see all this black smoke coming up all the valleys. And I'm just like, that must be coming from the coal power plants at Shiprock. And then I went to like Thanksgiving one time with a bunch of classmates to Sedona. And you go on US 89, and you go past like the high tension wires, and you can see the smoke, and you can see that the Lake Powell now is flooded, and the land was desecrated. And I shared, before even Monkey Wrench Gang was written by Edward Abbey, the same desire to live the actual book, Monkey Wrench Gang, right? Because any one of us that knew that sacred land before it was desecrated was so outraged by the dam and by the high tension wires and by the Black Mountain coal mines and all that stuff.
Briefly, could you describe what happens in Monkey Wrench Gang?
So what happens in Monkey Wrench Gang was that they blow up the dam, and they cut down the high tension wires, and they liberate they sabotage the corporate structure of the Four Corners area. That's roughly what it was. And then I had two friends, like I say, there was an informant who actually did topple the high tension wire, and the one that was in Monkey Wrench Gang, and then she got put in prison, her and Mark, Peggy and Mark. And then
so you're inspired by like some of the stories from your family, and then also from writers, and
also what I visually saw. I mean, the fact that I knew the beauty of the Hopi land, it was so powerful to be in the Hopi land and to be with Hopi people. But when I was on top of the mountain at 16 years of age and saw the desecration, realized that that's what I was seeing. I said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to end an economic and political system that would ever even allow something that horrific to go on. So that's how that basically is how I got started. But I have many other the Vietnam War was happening, right? And so I could relate that to Henry David Thoreau's on civil disobedience and his refusal to pay war taxes for the war in Mexico, and and then Martin Luther King gets killed. I was in Shenandoah when King gets killed, and we actually were going to go visit a cousin in Philadelphia, and we went up there. That's when the riots had started. So when we were in Washington D.C. going on the Beltway 495, there was massive tanks and military personnel everywhere, and there's these helicopters flying like crazy above us, and you could see black smoke coming out of DC. You could see Baltimore on fire before you went in the Fort McHenry tunnel, and then we're in the black neighborhood, and we're staying with Aunt Ethel in the black neighborhood in Philadelphia, and there's armored personnel carriers, and there's troops with sandbags and Gatling guns and dogs and M16s, and the whole thing is crazy. And then the fires all start that night, and our hotel room fills with smoke, and and many other things. Like they desegregated my elementary school, and all the black kids from the in Luray, Virginia, and the black kids were deemed have Down syndrome automatically and placed in special education. They had colored only and whites only signs in town, and no Jews allowed signs, and so I grew, all that kind of stuff very much influenced me to be a radical. So that's how I became a radical.
Yeah, I know it's kind of an unfair question to ask.
It's a fun question to answer,
What's
though,
the
right?
one moment, yeah, that politicized you? But okay, so we got like a partial story of some of the elements growing up that influenced your politics. What was the origin of Food Not Bombs, which you started in Boston?
Yeah, so I was going to art school, studying painting and sculpture at Boston University. And that was completely by accident, but anyway, I loved it. It was great. And and it turned out to be one of the best art schools in the world. And I had no idea. I just fell into it by accident. And going there, one of the projects was the food co-op, which Howard Zinn, which would become my American history professor, was part of that. I was in that little anarchist collective at Boston University. And so because I'd been at the food co-op, I got a job at Bread and Circus, which was a natural food store, and probably the second commercial natural food store in the Boston area. Erewhon was the first. And then so anyway, I'm doing produce every morning, which was great, and I was able to then go to school afterwards, because you had to have everything set up by the time the customers came in. So one day this guy comes by and he says, "Oh, I live in this Catholic worker house," or something like that, "and do you have any produce you're throwing out?" And we had just opened, so I was like one of the first produce workers there. So I said, "Yeah, I've got a bunch right here." And he said, "I don't need all of that." I thought, I should take it to the housing projects a few blocks away on Portland Ave. So I would take the produce there on my way to school and drop it off. And then one day the moms that were there were telling me about this new building just opened across the street, and they were designing nuclear weapons. And it turned out it was Draper Lab, and they're mostly at the time, the main thing was GPS for intercontinental nuclear missiles. And that gave me the idea of having the name Food Not Bombs. But then the thing that brought us really together was that we were going to these protests at Seabrook, New Hampshire, to stop nuclear power. And this is around this time of 3 Mile Island and all that kind of stuff going on, the disaster there. And so we're up there in October 6, 1979, the first occupation attempt. And our theory was we'd break into the construction site and seize it and not let them continue to work. And so we tried that, but about 6,000 people showed up on in the October 79 one, and we practiced for like a year. We would even do we'd find chain link fences, and we'd have people pretend like they're the riot police, and we would be the protesters, and we would have video cameras, or I guess actually Super 8 cameras, and we'd Super 8 film the whole thing, and then we'd all go back like we were in football. And this was something you did in football in those days. I don't know if it happens anymore. I haven't done football in a long time. But anyway, so we would analyze it, And then we decide what, oh no, we need to be more this equipment, that equipment. So then on May 24th, occupation attempt, 1980, which is Memorial Day weekend, and we all go up there and we're trying to pull down the fences again, but they're like shooting tear gas at us and beating the crap out of us. And they're even dropping tear gas on us from helicopters and stuff like that. And so about midday, we're all blocking the front entrance, sitting in this one paved area. And the cops come in and they arrest one of my friends, Brian Feigenbaum. And it turns out really why they arrested him for felony assault battery of a police officer is because he was agreed to be our the organization Coalition for Direct Action at Seabrook's media spokesperson. So his real name was below his face on TV, because in those days you didn't bring ID to protest, and all of us would be either Emma. All the women would call themselves Emma Goldman or Lucy Stone or something like that. All the men would be Alexander Berkman or Kropotkin.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That's how we did it. So then anyway, he gets arrested, and the bail's real high, and I'm somebody though that can put up the bail. So we get him out that night, and we are driving back to Boston, and we decide, wow, we should do we need to pay him back. Let's do bake sales and see if we could raise the money. So we start doing that, but we don't really make any money. And we also had an old van, and we had a moving company called Smooth Move. So we're moving this family, and they throwing out a poster saying, wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed, and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber. So we go, aha, what we should do is go to the Army Navy surplus store, buy some military uniforms, mount the poster on cardboard, and with our little card table and our baked goods, we'll go to Harvard Square or to the Boston Commons, and we tell people we're trying to buy a bomber. And there was kind of a media thing then where a bolt that was $5 cost $1,500 if it was going to be on a F-16 jet or whatever they were designing back then.
Yeah.
So
you got to keep it interesting for yourself, and the media aspects.
Well, what turned out to be cool about it was while we really didn't make a lot more money, people would stop and hang out with us. And it's the problem in America even now, but definitely back then was, it was after the Vietnam War, and there's kind of this conservative era that's gone on, and no one really wants to talk politics, or about world events or anything. They just ignore you and walk by, so this got people to hang and talk to you. So that becomes the next thing that becomes Food Not Bombs. That really is how it is the beginning of Food Not Bombs, that whole little story there. And then, but then what becomes like what we're doing now is we decide we keep doing more theater. And Reagan had just gotten elected, just been, the inauguration had just happened. And so we decided we would do a soup line outside the stockholders meeting of the Bank of Boston, and which was at the Federal Reserve Bank at South Station. And so we would then, so we're going to all dress up like hobos, like the Great Depression. And our message was that Reagan could create an environment where poverty gets so bad that people will have to go and stand in a soup line to get food.
Right. Which is kind of the propaganda that they are probably putting out against other world powers at the time.
Oh, yeah, because remember that you have the
Russia, China.
Yeah, the Soviet Union is happening, and there's supposed to be bread lines in the Soviet Union, right?
Right.
And
but the same thing is happening over here.
Yeah, and what's kind of incredible is some people I remember this one guy comes by out of South Station, he's a business suit, and he's like, oh my God, Reagan's only been in office 30 days and we all got soup lines in America. This is liberal, Boston. So that was the only state that voted for Carter, I think.
So like liberal finance bros.
Yeah, it was like that. And that was the energy of Massachusetts and of Boston at the time. We had Tip O'Neill was our congressperson, stuff like that. But so anyway, we didn't think we had enough friends we said, well, we haven't gotten together a bunch of friends to really do this. Maybe I should go to the Pine Street Inn homeless shelter and talk to the guys there. So there's about 20 guys in this little room on Pine Street, and I give a speech about midnight about this protest. I wasn't even thinking about feeding them. I was thinking maybe they'd like to come to a protest. And they, sure enough, they were like, oh yeah, protest like the 60s. And the next day, these guys all show up. And one woman, I remember one woman came, and she was very colorful. She had rainbow ribbons all tied to her and everything. It was a very interesting person. And so we, at the end, they're like, you got to do this every day. There's no food for homeless people. And because in 1980, that was March 26, 1981, there was, no one even thought of there being homeless people. That traditionally, the homeless people were the five guys that were drunk at the corner of, in the South End near the, near the Symphony. And then there was the Bowery. If you happen to go to New York City, there was a lot of homeless guys in the Bowery. And that was what homeless people in America was. It wasn't like how we see it now. But so
Like the encampments and like RVs that are just like in every city almost.
yeah, so back then what it was basically World War II and Korean War and Vietnam War vets who were alcoholic or on heroin or something, and it wasn't a lot of them. It wasn't due to economic issues. It was due to post-traumatic stress disorder. That was really what it was. And it was not that, I mean, a lot of the people that were suffering that lived actually in single room occupancy hotels and stuff. And
Right.
in San Francisco, that was the deal. There was like 68 to 70,000 dock workers that lived in what we now, south of Market. And
Yeah, this is
they're
like one
gone.
of the only successes I think of like housing veterans is one place that the government seems to have done it semi-right in terms of just giving people housing, like giving people housing so that they can like have some sense of stability from which to like figure out the rest of their life. But no one outside of veterans and like a few other groups have really been able to access this as rich as the US is.
And even a lot of vets aren't. I spent years trying, about maybe 5 or 6 years trying to get vets in who from Vietnam Warrior vets. And there was a warehouse fire that burned all their documents. So they couldn't prove they were in Vietnam. And that's that. So there was up until about 5 years ago that it was, couldn't even, a lot of vets were just left on the streets because there was no way to access housing because there was no way to prove they had been in a war or a Vietnam era person, veteran. So anyway, that was like really crazy. I struggled hard with that, and I have to find other vets that knew the system to try to figure out how to get them in help.
Of course, the maze of like trying to navigate that, the paperwork, the administrative violence that happens, like that
Exactly
keeps people from accessing the support that is, supposed to be there for them.
Yeah, there should be. I mean, yeah, automatically there should be. See, I think the biggest problem is if people become homeless and have substance abuse problems and those kind of things, the getting off the street ends up being such a million times worse because you can't often just put a person in housing anymore and have it work out, because people have all kinds of more problems. Where if they had started having those problems while housed, it would have been, because there wasn't like, I mean, even though the 60s and people doing LSD and heroin and blah, 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 there wasn't like, those people weren't ending up homeless, right? Whereas the economy, so the cost, I remember when the minimum wage went up to $5. That was like, wow, that's so cool. Because the job I had before that was like $1.79 an hour. But then you could have, then I was renting an apartment for $63 a month at $5 an hour. So it wasn't like an insane thing.
Yeah.
So anyway, so all of that, the homeless crisis got just not only bigger and worse, but then the ability to solve it got more and more difficult.
Yeah. You didn't have like BlackRock and some of the private equity buying up all of the available houses, keeping them empty.
Yeah, it's just a nightmare. Like in San Francisco, I've already survived a lot of these crazy economic crises, right? So you had like the savings and loan crisis. which a lot of people don't even, it's the same as the housing foreclosure crisis of 2007, 2008. This just happened to be the one before it. And so in 92, we start this thing called Homes Not Jails in San Francisco. And we take over an abandoned, like a gutted hotel across from Glide Memorial Church on the night before Thanksgiving. And then we also, somebody cleverly got a key to look at real estate, which was a XXX theater in the Tenderloin about a block away from there. And so we moved a bunch of families into the second floor of the XXX theater, which had been abandoned for, I don't know if they were ever even showing XXX movies there yet. And so we and we got them Christmas trees and presents, and it was this whole cool thing. But then when the mayor, at that time Frank Jordan, came to cut turkey at Glide, like the mayors always do, then and we like, because we knew we couldn't seize that building, control it, because they'd already pulled all the windows out, the glass and frames. It was just like a 7-8 story building. So we hung banners out, and one of those banners was Homes Not Jails, and that's where we got that name. And ultimately, according to the book No Trespassing by Andre Carr, we had keys to 400 buildings. So what we would do is, that's also pre-computers in the way we know them now. And so we would ride our bikes up and down the streets, and we'd see like an abandoned house. We'd go to City Hall and we'd look at the tax records. And then, because it's a savings and loan crisis, there'd be like 30 mortgage companies owning that building, and none of them from San Francisco. So so then we would then break off the lock, put our own lock on it, and then at Food Not Bombs that night, we would find the most vulnerable people there that we felt, particularly families or people in wheelchairs and things, and we say, hey, you want a place to live indoors? And of course they were like, oh yeah, this is really cool. So then we said, meet us at 9 o'clock tomorrow at this address, and we'd already been in there a few days. Usually we mostly worked in the houses in the middle of the day, because no one would steal a house in the middle of the day. So we would be fixing them up, and we'd turn on the water and make sure there wasn't broken pipes inside the building, and then we would do that kind of stuff. And then when the new families moved in, the neighbors would often go, oh wow, they're finally renting that old place. That's been a night so for years. And we had 100 houses occupied at any given time. And
amazing.
And it's kind of sad it didn't spread to the rest of the country, but you know, we tried to get it to move to the rest of the country. And it'd be great if it started happening again.
Yeah, I mean, some of that happened with, like groups like Acorn, moving like into Detroit or New Orleans. Like, there are some histories of like people being able to squat for longer amounts of time. Of course, today, the amount of surveillance tech that is dedicated towards solving the quote unquote problem of people like living in an otherwise empty building. I mean, they must be spending billions of dollars on that.
Yeah, I think the penalties of burglary and stuff are much stricter now, and it's much less likely. We would get burglary charges and trespassing charges, but then because it was such a huge campaign, and it was such an obscene thing that all these homeless people, see, the same amount of homeless people were living outside in San Francisco in 92 as now. I mean, there might be more now, but it was like 25,000 homeless people in San Francisco, according to the census.
And you had that same issue of like, oh, there's actually a lot of empty buildings around here that could be used by people tonight. But I was wondering, when the first time you experienced pushback around doing like the Food Not Bombs work was, if you can remember.
Yeah, so there's kind of two different versions. So first time I got pushback was by the mafia in Boston. And that's why I ended up living in San Francisco, because I had to hide from them. But because they were going to kill me and my wife. So we decided to split. But because the problem it was really interesting, because their issue was they were trying to gentrify the neighborhood around Kenmore Square, where the Red Sox are. And because the Red Sox, 30,000 people would come to all the Red Sox games whenever they're in town, it was a perfect place for homeless people to panhandle. And then also there was like all these woods right around there and swamps, and so it was a great place for people to live. and we became friends with most of them when I had a company there. And I was the graphic designer for the business association, and many of my clients, including the Red Sox, are right there in the neighborhood. And so they were trying to do this really get the police to drive all the homeless out, and they were demeaning them and everything. So my wife and I wrote a letter to the association saying we didn't think we should treat the homeless so poorly and so on. And it turned out they played hardball. And so a number of things happened, and I eventually had to move. So I had to actually go underground. And then, so then I eventually would run low on money. So I thought, well, I knew my wife was already sick of the cold of Boston. And so when we got to San Francisco, he said, well, I know you don't really want to go live anywhere north of here. We'll live in San Francisco. So we lived in San Francisco. So then I had helped organize events with Brian Wilson of Veterans for Peace. And he had this thing called, Fast for Peace on the Boston Commons. And so I participated in that. And so when he was doing a thing at Concord Naval Weapons Station in the East Bay and blocking shipments of weapons going to El Salvador to the war. And so one day they had it was called Nuremberg Action. And so a group of about 5 or 6 vets would sit on the tracks, and then the Contra Costa County Police Department, Sheriff's Department would take them away. But one day, the train sped up, and it ran over Brian's legs and severed them. So Saturday, there's a big protest. And like I say, we're trying not to be too visible to the mob, because we assume the mob in Boston and the mob in San Francisco might be related, and as it turns out, they were. But so anyway, we go to that rally, and then on the way to our car, we see all these people prying up the tracks where Brian was hit. So we're standing there watching it. Then we get home, and back then they had ABC, NBC, and CBS. And then if you had the money for cable, you could watch CNN, and CNN had just started. And so we're watching the stations, and there my wife and I are standing in the foreground looking like we're directing the people tearing up the tracks, right? So Andrea goes to me and says, oh, you really miss doing Food Not Bombs. You haven't done it since we fled Boston, which was like maybe a year earlier than that, maybe a little bit more than that. And so I said, oh yeah, okay, I'll start doing it again. So I started doing Food Not Bombs in San Francisco. And eventually I run across I'm testing out different places. And I was doing UN Plaza one time. And these 2 young guys from Baltimore Washington, D.C. come up. And they go, oh, we just graduated from college in the 60s studies. I mean, it's kind of funny that they actually have a department that studies, you can get a degree in. So anyway, so they were really into what we're doing. So we end up organizing some meetings and stuff, and we decided we'll do Monday at Golden Gate Park, because there was 2 churches that did the weekend, and Haight-Ashbury Soup Kitchen did Tuesday through Friday. So I set up there every Monday, and it's a beautiful thing. God, it was so cool doing the entrance to Golden Gate Park at the end of Haight, it's Haight and Stanyon. So you had both tourists and you had homeless people, and you were mixing the whole group together, so you could do all this outreach. It was just fantastic. So anyway, one day this hippie comes by, and he goes, oh, you can get a permit for this. And in Cambridge, we were friends with city government. In fact, we organized 3 marches from City Hall to Draper Lab when I was there. There was co-sponsor was Cambridge City Council and Food Not Bombs. I mean, that's pretty incredible that we had that. And we were friends with the city council in Boston and stuff as well. So anyway, so my assumption was I was going to get like same little piece of paper I had in Cambridge, which was for the use of finding you if you left your amp on the street or something. Nothing. It wasn't like you could not get a street performance permit. You automatically, if you're going to be a street performer, you could either get it if you wanted, if you thought you might leave some stuff around by accident.
Gotcha.
Or you don't ever need to have it.
It was like a service to the performer.
Correct. And if
Okay.
anybody ever listened to Click and Clack, the Tappan Brothers on NPR, that car show,
Sure, back in the day, yeah.
yeah, all those people that they talk about are people we personally knew and fed. Yeah, everyone. In fact, we got the Food Not Bombs van fixed at the Good News Garage. And
Hmm.
and an interesting thing about Click and Clack, they were in the Revolutionary Communist Party. And they had huge
Did not,
photos of Mao and everybody on there.
did not know that.
Yeah, no one knows that, but we, we were in and out of there a
That's
bunch.
funny.
So and we were friends with them. And so the that's what I thought this permit was going to be.
Right.
So I write a letter to this guy named Peter Ash at the Recreation and Parks Department office, which is really just across the end of the Panhandle from Hayton Stanton. And I don't hear back. And then the cops come by every Monday and ask us about this permit. And then I'd walk over to Rec and Park and ask them, where's this permit? Nobody there ever knew. And I'd always leave a message for Peter Ash, and he never got back to me. And then on August 15th, 1988, riot police came out of Golden Gate Park and arrested 9 of us, including myself. And so I was the first one arrested, even though I technically served no food. And there's a person, Greg Garr, who's an important person in the history of San Francisco for sure, although not well known. And he took this amazing black and white photos of the arrest. And one got in the Chronicle on, I believe, the page 3, and United Press International, which I don't even know if they exist anymore. They did a great article on us getting arrested. And the photo was like across the entire top of page 3. So when you flip over page 1, and the next thing you see is these riot police guarding Food Not Bombs.
And what's their excuse for arresting you?
Well, what they said, that there's a couple of things. Technically speaking, they said we didn't have a permit, but there was no permit. No such permit even existed. Officially, what the police told the media was that we were making a political statement and that wasn't allowed. That's a direct quote. Right? So
No free speech. Okay.
no free speech. So anyway, then the next week, people are so angry about that when they see the picture and I don't know if you know of David Solnit, but he does Art and Revolution and things like that. So anyway, he made the first poster for advertising a march down Haight Street to Hayton Stanton using that photo cut out of the Chronicle. And a lot of people came, maybe 150 people or something like that. And we marched down the street with carrying the food and banners and signs and banging pots and pans. And we get down there, and that's August 22nd. And they arrest 24 people. And about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe less than that now, something like that, maybe, yeah, it was, I think COVID was just happening when I learned this, because we have this huge FOIA campaign that's gone on for years, Freedom of Information Act requests. Turns out that the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force came to that, observed that. According to a memo I got, like I say, probably a year, maybe 6 months to a year into COVID. And it showed that they said that we were a credible national security threat. And they and then that Thanksgiving, a bunch of Food Not Bombs activists went on Thanksgiving, people went home. And some of the people like flew to places, visit family in other places. And then when they were getting on the plane to come back, National Guard people would come up to them and go, hey, they'd see the Food Not Bombs button. And in those days we had that was real popular to have the inch size buttons. And so people go, oh yeah, we just studied this group, Food Not Bombs. They're in domestic terrorism school. This is America's most hardcore terrorist group.
Wow.
So that's when we realized we were America's most hardcore terrorist group.
I mean, yeah, I guess the threat that like the Black Panther parties, like, free lunches apparently posed to the US as well. Like, what have you surmised is like the hostility towards people offering free food from, what the powers that be, what is their justification for criminalizing?
So now, according to the U.S. State Department in April of 2009, where they gave a lecture at Tufts University, they compared Al Qaeda and the people that served the vegan meals in the park. And if I had not seen this interview on C-SPAN twice, I would have thought I was hallucinating. But what they decided was, at the end of their lecture, they said the people that serve the vegan meals in the park are indigenous to their communities, they're friendly and well loved. And and Al Qaeda straps bombs onto themselves, and that's not really popular movement, because how many people really want to blow themselves up? That's the way they put it. And they did not admit to being the people behind Al Qaeda, but anyway, but that's what they're saying. And so they said that if the group serving the vegan meals was successful, they were encouraging the American people to divert military spending to healthcare, education, and other social services. The military would be drained of its financial support, and they couldn't fight groups like Al Qaeda anymore. That's what they were saying. And when we were first getting arrested, and unfortunately, I'd have to go to the San Francisco library and look this up because it's not online. But there used to be a paper called The Progress in San Francisco. And they had an article about how Bechtel, who at the time was headquartered in San Francisco, Bank of America, which at the time was headquartered in San Francisco, and Chevron, which was also headquartered there. I don't know where their headquarters are anymore, but that they were the people that were working with an Asian, probably a Hong Kong or maybe Singapore, real estate company called Four Seas, as in four seas of ocean type seas, and that's why they were trying to get rid of us, and that they manipulated the Four Seas person, and then they were trying to change the name of Haight-Ashbury to Coal Valley, because no one would ever buy property in Haight-Ashbury, they assumed.
Sure. Yeah, they're rebranding neighborhoods as we speak in order to serve real estate right now, I'm sure.
Yeah. And Pelosi had just started being a congresswoman around then. Feinstein, I was there when Feinstein dedicated her first anti-homeless bus stop at the corner of Gary and Park Presidio.
What did that look like?
So what that was, and I don't know if San Francisco still has it, but they made these little paddles. So a bar would go up and there'd be like 2 or 3 little plastic paddles.
Of course.
And a little roof over it and stuff.
Barely sittable, little
stool. Yeah, because otherwise then a homeless person would get out of the rain and lay down. And she was so excited about
that.
Yeah.
Can't have that. Yeah. There's like a group, every so often there's a group that'll come out and put benches anonymously on the sidewalks, which is nice to see. Otherwise, we have politicians like Scott Wiener here did it to the Castro. I know, basically removed any park bench from the area so that you can't sit anywhere.
Yep. So here's another thing that I had learned. So there used to be does the Examiner still exist?
Barely. It's probably down to 2 staff or something like that.
Yeah. So anyway, back then, the Chronicle and the Examiner, a lot of cities had these two, sort of the Democrat and Republican paper, right? And so the Examiner, I think it was supposed to be the Democrat paper, oddly, but might have been the Republican paper, I don't know. And after we were getting arrested and so on, and I was at some kind of hearing, Rob Morris was talking to me, and he asked me, he says, well, first of all, I'm going to tell you another story, which leads to this story. So when we negotiate with Art Agnos, because he's the mayor after Feinstein and before Frank Jordan, we, Art Agnos is reading this press release about how we worked everything out. Now we can start feeding people again with with this new permit process that we've now agreed upon, and blah blah blah. And so at Room 200, the media places all of their mics in a fan in front of the mayor for him to speak, so they can get
at City Hall.
At City Hall, Room 200, City Hall. So the media starts asking me questions, And so I'm answering, and they go, no, you got to sit over there with the mics. We can't pick it up. So I sit in the chair. So I'm sitting there and I'm answering the questions. And then Art comes up and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, don't get too comfortable in that chair, McHenry, or Keith maybe. And everybody laughs. It's like this big, it's so funny. So then Rob asked me if I was going to run for mayor. And I go, no, but if I'm elected, I'll abolish the office. And so that makes it in the Examiner. And then I have another friend of mine, Jan Spence, whose son was the producer of the Grateful Dead. And she'd gotten arrested with me. She got arrested giving away double rainbow ice cream at City Hall. And I was getting arrested for serving the food. And we became good friends. And make a sign, say, we'll be mayor for food. And I would stand in front of iconic things in San Francisco with my sign. And she'd take a photo of it. And so we made a poster where you could see City Hall dome, I'm at Alamo Square, and you can see the dome behind me. And I've got my sign, and then I just cut Rob Morris's thing right out of the newspaper and stuck it on the bottom. And my job for the whole 10 years I lived in San Francisco was putting up posters, mostly, except for the very beginning. I have another crazy events that happened when I first moved there. I worked for a place called Bob's Typing Thumbtack Bugle. And I very crazy surveillance stories of that. Like a woman comes and she wants a resume changed, and she wants me to take out the Peace Corps stuff and write a cover letter to KCBS Radio and to the director, and she wants to be a reporter. But her employment from present to whenever was head of military intelligence for the Pacific Rim. So Michael Kino is her employee. I don't know if you know who Michael Kino is.
I don't.
But okay, so he's the head of Operation Monarch. So they were snatching kids. So military intelligence is responsible for daycare centers on military bases, and they were taking the kids from the daycare center in Presidio and doing ritual sexual abuse things at his house on the Presidio, and that was becoming a big news story at the time. He had the Church of Set or something like that. So that was like, it was a big scandal when I was there. But it wasn't until years later I realized what a weird thing so anyway, this is where I learned the term information extraction. So on her resume, she got her undergraduate degree in information extraction at Fort Huachuca in Arizona. That's the unit that did Abu Ghraib. And the famous photos of Abu Ghraib, that comes out of Fort Huachuca in that information extraction facility. And then she got her postgraduate degree in information extraction at Fort Ord, back when it was a full-on military base.
Damn.
So she is, and then she becomes a reporter, oddly enough.
She got the job.
You got the job. But then I'm starting to think, what a weird thing that you would do that, because why would you come to a guy in 1980, when was that? 88, 87, yeah, 88, 87 really, and ask me to type up her resume? Because she's the highest ranking intelligence officer
like they would have a whole department.
Yeah, she has employees and everything. What was going on with that? And I remember her address was 333 Parker, which is across the street from where my office was on Geary and Parker. And I forget her name, but she did interview me. I've got a photo of her interviewing me when I'm in a Santa Claus costume, because I started wearing Santa Claus costumes to protest, to avoid, because then if they don't beat you up as much when you're dressed as Santa. And anyway, so
good tip.
Yeah, so the intelligence situation of America is really out there. So anyway, that was so what reason I'm telling you this story is because one of the things that the intelligence community could do in San Francisco was to freak out the local politicians, because, and particularly at that time, very sensitive. So this is like 88, and it was in recent memory when Milk and Moscone got assassinated, right? And so Milk and Moscone were killed because out of fear that the Democratic Party would move to the left
Hmm.
and they did not want that to happen. And there was a thing called the Phil Burton machine, and there was Phil Burton Federal Building on Golden Gate Ave, right? And they so they offed Milk and Moscone because Milk was the left-wing gay politician in that race, and they had put all their money into the pro-corporate gay politician in the Castro. And the person that was most responsible for Milk and for Moscone becoming the elected was the People's Temple and Jim Jones. So that's why Jim Jones becomes head of housing authority or whatever for San Francisco. So they needed to eliminate this entire operation so they could move in the Pelosi Feinstein direction, right, to corporate and maintain Phil, the Phil Burton's pro-corporate Democratic Party direction.
That's what we have today.
Exactly. They didn't really understand anarchism. They assumed I was going to run for mayor and I was building this, because even Art Agnew said I'm trying to create a new social agenda and all these things like that, because they were so fearful that they were able to be manipulated by the people in power to fear me and Food Not Bombs, because they had some weird idea that we would run for office and take power.
It's wild. 1970s. I mean, I think looking back on today, people are going to be like, what was happening in San Francisco politics?
Yeah.
But all right, so I don't want to keep you here forever. I was hoping that you might be able to give people some, I don't know, some strategies if they are wanting to start Food Not Bombs in their area, if it doesn't exist, which it very well may. People who are listening to this, because there are hundreds of Food Not Bombs across the world. Anyone can set it up. The brand is not under copyright lock and key. Any strategies for avoiding criminalization when people are starting out?
I do have a flyer called "What to Do If the Police Come, try to stop you." So, but I'd say, first of all, this is a golden era of Food Not Bombs. And you had actually asked in the written questions if we were all anarchists when we started Food Not Bombs, and yes, we were. And in fact, when Reagan won the election that night, our dog Yoda had eaten the back cover of the volume 1 of Emma Goldman's Living My Life, and that was assigned to us. And we spent the whole night on acid spray painting all the buildings we could in the Boston area. And then at the end we go, oh fuck, we can't just do this for the rest of our lives. We got to come up with something else. But anyway, that played a role in the founding of Food Not Bombs, but we were always anarchists. So I think this is the most golden age for anarchism and mutual aid, because all the institutions and political systems are completely broken down, obviously. I mean, this Epstein, Sean Diddy thing, you start realizing anybody that made it on TV was blackmailed in some way. No, maybe not everybody had to get videotape having sex with children, but you may have been the most golden person in the world, but they go, oh yeah, we noticed that you have tons of porn on your computer, which you didn't put there and you've never seen before and you don't have any interest in, but we can let everyone know that that's the case. But being an anarchist, you can navigate. Like I thought with COVID, it was amazing because that was anarchist heaven. You could, the government couldn't do anything, but as an anarchist, we were just like out there on the street serving food. We served food every day for 3 years.
Right.
And we built our own total infrastructure of survival. And we had our own free concerts every holiday. So it was Valentine's Day or Christmas, or we actually did the Christmas meal for the city every Christmas. And we did the Thanksgiving meal outdoors for the city. And we were just autonomous for totally. We got evicted from 8 locations by the city and 2 by developers and 1 by the county. And we just kept doing it. We never missed a day.
I guess that's good advice right there. It's just you can just keep doing the thing. Like it has been done, obviously hundreds of cases every week.
Yeah.
Today, somewhere in the world, but 100 places in the world.
Well, right now it's like I just before we got on, I got an email from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and they're like, "We're starting a new Food Not Bombs in Fort Wayne, Indiana." And then yesterday, I had to put 3 new chapters on the Food Not Bombs map because they just started, and I'd say almost every day there's at least one new Food Not Bombs chapter contact me.
Oh,
And see, that's the other thing because so being a decentralized, non-hierarchical movement where each group's autonomous. So there's 3 principles of Food Not Bombs. The food is always vegan or vegetarian, free to anyone, rich or poor, drunk or sober. And that's kind of where food is a right, not a privilege, kind of is related to that principle. That's a common Food Not Bombs slogan. And then, even though I must say, during COVID, meat ended up sneaking into Food Not Bombs chapters around the country because there was no other food for anybody. And traditionally, before COVID, we would just send all the food to other soup kitchens that were meat and dairy.
hmm.
But that, I must say, that's not as firm as it could be. And the other thing is that that there's no presidents, directors, that each group's autonomous and make decisions by consensus, where they invite all the people that are not only, the people eating have equal say to the people organizing it. That there's not some difference between the poor coming to our charity. That's that we're not. And so then the third thing principle is that Food Not Bombs is not a charity, that it's dedicated to taking nonviolent direct action to change society, so no one has to live in the streets or eat at a soup kitchen. So, and then the logo is free to. We didn't even do that Mark Schwartz, what's that guy's name? He ended up killing himself because he was downloading all this information from MIT.
Aaron
Mark
Schwartz.
Eric Schwartz, yeah. So he has that great. So we're even more out there than he was because we don't even use the common thing that he invented, which was a great thing and in the spirit of Food Not Bombs for sure. Um, but anyway, so and I love seeing weird versions of the Food Not Bombs logo, even though I'm the guy that designed it. So I stopped using my social security number that I got as a kid when I was 18. And I just lived up until the year 2001 off the books 100% with no social security number. I made one up one time for some reason that I needed, but it's not mine. So I'm like anarchist through and through. That's for sure. So
Yeah.
anyway, that helps us a lot because then whatever's going on, you're not tied to some kind of institutional
Right.
idea of how things need to go or not go or whatever. You just flow, you just stick to your principles that everybody's equal. You're the things that are important are your relationships and community and making sure everybody has what they need to survive, to flourish and live, that water and food and culture and friendship and
Just like the
shelter.
very
Yeah,
basics.
the way
Yeah,
the
like
world is that really.
for sure.
and,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so what I'm very hopeful that because it looks like we're going to have a total fascist military clampdown in maybe worldwide, but definitely in the U.S. And so a Food Not Bombs thing is the perfect thing to be, or any other kind of decentralized mutual aid efforts, because and then you're not tied into having expectations of how things are supposed to go. So it may be, like the next big thing I think is going to really be a threat to our freedom is the going into the whole digital control, because that's why they
Mhm.
made the national ID, digital ID, real ID, and which is a national ID, even though you get the card at DMV, but it's all one database controlled by Palantir, and Palantir is also the people targeting, the children in Gaza and running the war against Russia and Iran and handling our social security. I think that they'll eventually create a like kind of a digital panopticon, where they watch everything that you have. You could tell that by Larry Ellison in September before the election, saying that everyone will be, everyone will be in their best behavior because we'll know
Right.
everything you're
Yeah.
going to do,
There's
right?
that quote from the Oracle founder who bought the island of Lanai
Yeah.
in Hawaii, but used to live here in San Francisco, used to be based here. but also, yeah, like is now, heavily invested in TikTok, which is one of, uh, for better or worse, has replaced like newspapers and cable news for a lot of people in terms of where they get their information.
Yeah, it's interesting because, Oracle was started and Larry Ellison got his start with money from the Central Intelligence Agency,
Mm,
as did Palantir, as did Google, as
yeah.
did Facebook, as did PayPal.
Yeah.
All this stuff. This was
Even Signal. Yeah.
it's all like intelligence operations. Yeah, I thought it was amazing when they shut down TikTok for a day, Larry did, and then he extends it up and it's got a message. Thank you,
Right.
Trump, for this. And
I
then
mean, yeah, that's the world we're living in. That
yeah,
just happened a few months ago.
yep. So the fact is that we meet on the streets at appointed times with food, and we talk to each other directly, and we don't have that. I mean, we're under surveillance. I don't know if you remember Commander X. Oh, so he
Mm,
was a famous hacker, and he claims, but he's not probably really have this. It's not. He was supposedly one of the founders of Anonymous,
okay.
and but he's some of I so when he was he and I were doing a live stream out of this homeless camp in San Francisco for every Saturday morning for a while, and he was underground. He had jumped bail. He'd gotten busted in doing a denial of service attack on the county of Santa Cruz infrastructure, their website or whatever. And so he got charged with that, and then I become associated with him more directly because he did a whole campaign with Anonymous when I was jailed in Orlando, Florida, for feeding people. And so when he gets captured in Mexico by the U.S. and rendition back to San Francisco. And so after was in Santa Rosa for a year or something, I was able to, I worked with his lawyers and we were able to have him sent to, he lived with me basically for like 8 months or something like that. The city of San Francisco is one of the most corrupt possible places. If you ever get a chance, read, Mark Twain's San Francisco. That's a great book. He changed his name to Mark Twain because the San Francisco police were going to kill him for being Samuel Clemens, right? So then eventually he couldn't even live in San Francisco as Mark Twain, so he moved to Virginia City.
The
But
corruption, yeah, has been happening.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's at the very
For a
beginning.
minute.
Yeah, the whole thing is this one giant real estate scam. It's been from the very beginning. At one point, there was Buena Vista and there was San Francisco in the same town. One owned by the Spanish, one owned by some real estate guys from New York City. But anyway, so this kind of decentralized, non-hierarchical way, and we don't have boundaries. We're against boundaries as anarchists, both physical boundaries of like nation state lines, like Anarchists Against the Wall, which grew out of Funabom's Tel Aviv and was mostly Funabom's Tel Aviv at the time. I think it might still exist.
Oh,
Um, they, their slogan was no state solution, not two-state solution. And both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem Funabombs are like in the thick of stuff right now with the war going on. And and then the Beirut Funab bombs, they've been going through a lot of crazy stuff. They got really big when the port explosion happened, in Beirut. And there was finally we've got a way to get them money without us having to go there directly. But we actually had sent money to a Lebanese woman that does Funab bombs in Montreal, and so that she could fly to when she was going to visit her mom in Beirut, she could get the cash to the Beirut Funab bombs. We always have our ways. The Filipino one, we're just now got money to that one's easier, man. You can do PayPal to Philippines. But so that's really, they're doing a huge 25th anniversary Funab bombs gathering in one of the neighborhoods of Manila.
tight.
I
Yeah,
can't,
no.
I
And
can't,
so people do this, they've been doing it. I mean, there are ways to get around, obviously the state wants to kind of X out anything that indicates that people could be potentially self-sufficient. They've tried their hardest, and yet you persist.
yeah, we're like water or something, you just keep moving around whatever their repression is. And also, I think that the biggest thing during this fascism. So we actually, we had some Zoom meetings with the Myanmar Food Not Bombs kids after the military coup, and they had great ideas and tips on how to operate under a military dictatorship. And so that's what we're looking at, right? You have this personal relationships and this kind of hope and energy. Because having a digital, AI controlled robotic future, one of the goals is to suck the soul out of everyone. So you're just nothing but a commodity and an extension of whatever robotic trip they've got going on, right? And then you have programmable digital currency, and then you've got to show, you won't even be able to go in any buildings anywhere unless you can have facial recognition lets you in the building, and they know every
Right.
detail of you. And Palantir definitely now knows. They have all your health records, all your travel records, all your court documents,
Sure.
all your financial records, every single thing about you. And then they could never really, that was all, having that much data was not that useful until you develop AI that can analyze it as a machine analyzing of stuff. Then it can be useful, right? So,
Right. And now OpenAI, with their World ID, they're trying
yeah.
to get people to pay to be part of this bigger database so that, all they have to do is scan your face. And
What's that poor young guy that got killed probably by Sam Altman
oh,
people?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's his name?
Falaji.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a tragic story. I've corresponded with his parents and stuff because I think he knew how bad AI would be. See, I never use any of the AI features of anything. I don't want to. I already feel bad enough. I live across the street and somebody there's two people with Teslas and they're monitoring 100% of everything that comes in and out goes right to Palantir, right? But that's the thing about what politics is. So politics is who has the most guns and the most radios and the most logistics, right? Newsom was like all excited about some court order that ICE can't do thing in California, right? But the reality, ICE doesn't need to listen to a court order.
Right.
Why nobody has to listen to a court order.
Right.
And this is what I learned from my grandfather. This is what I learned from living. And that's what's important. I think anarchists, like, we have this maneuverability under these kind of circumstances. If we stick to our principles, where and anarchism has many variations, needless to say. As long as you keep like this kind of thing going when the most repressive stuff and be agile and be able to move around. My next Substack article is going to be about this kind of thing where being decentralized, mutual aid focused groups that are affinity groups, as anarchists would call them, and in small little groups in your community. So what you were opening with this, about other types of projects like homes not jails, food not bombs, food not lawns, free radio movement, pirate radio movement, all these decentralized, non-hierarchical, grassroots kind of mutual aid. At one point in San Francisco, we had the entire parallel system that was a shadow system of the actual infrastructure of the main society, because we had our own radio stations, we had our own publications, we had our own food, we had our own, even though we were scavenging the food and the housing and off of capitalism, we had an entire culture that was outside, punk rock, MDC, Jello Biafra, all these people like that. We had a whole trip happening outside of the system. And that, since this system is completely becoming an authoritarian, digital, fascist
Sure.
police state, that's going to be a beautiful for us because we will just have to keep maneuvering out of the way, and except for strategically when we need to be confronting them, but it could be at some point where the things are so brutal that you can't even really protest anymore, and you're essentially creating these, like, almost like that brief moment in 1984 where Winston like leaves the Matrix and has his own world, and then sadly at the end goes back to the Matrix.
We have like, yeah, examples of this that happen all the time. Like you mentioned, yeah, like punk scenes. You mentioned earlier, like Grateful Dead, like going to a Dead show can sometimes feel like it's like there's an economy in and of itself happening at on the lot.
Yeah, the
So
lot, yeah, the culture on the parking lot's amazing, isn't it?
Occupy, of course, like where people are like for the first time, maybe it's clicking for them that there's like this self-sufficiency that can happen outside of the uh everyday.
I loved Occupy. That was so much fun. I've been trying to promote an idea of Occupy since '97. And I had a friend that lived in Marin, Uma Valentine, and mostly lived her life on a telephone. It's kind of funny. So we'd have these conversations because I have a toll-free number. I talk to a lot of people who have no money because I have a toll-free number, which I got as a gift when I was facing 25 to life in San Francisco. Clamshell Alliance activists from the 70s who happened to be selling 800 numbers and donated one to me.
Clamshell Alliance, anti-nuclear organization.
Yes. So Clamshell Alliance was the original nonviolent campaign. But then when a lot of anarchists got really involved rather than just only Quakers and so on, we started calling ourselves the Coalition for Direct Action at Seabrook. But a lot of us were Clamshell people. I was Clamshell. And my girlfriend was Abalone Alliance out here. And she was trying to shut down Lawrence Livermore Lab and Diablo Canyon nuclear power station. So there's like, it's kind of funny. And then she went to El Salvador for 6.5 years and during the war and was a human rights activist. And then I spent my time up here organizing in Boston against the war in El Salvador.
You mentioned the Quaker Church and you mentioned Glide earlier. Has there been rivalries or alliances with church groups that, I mean, potentially are getting funding to like feed people? And I could see like there being, some kind of controversy.
Oh, well, Glide was probably the first really bad situation. So I have a flyer when you want to start a Food Not Bombs, I send it to you called 7 Steps to Starting a Food Not Bombs. And it's based on the notes I took from when I started San Francisco Food Not Bombs. And one of the first things I did when I was working at the Bob's Typing and was, I sort of gradually left Bob's Typing and did Food Not Bombs. So since the office was on Geary, I would go to House of Bagels, get the bagels, go to Tom's Natural Food, get the natural food, blah, 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 right? Veritable vegetables, food, Rainbow Grocery, so on. And then I would take it to St. Anthony's Soup Kitchen and to Glide Memorial.
Yeah, right around the corner from there.
Yeah, and it was such a cool thing. So then when we get arrested, I go to, the next morning, I go down to House of Bagels, and they go, oh, no, they already came by and got it. Glide already came by and got it. Then I go to Tom's, and they said, you're not doing it anymore. I said, no, we're doing it. They said you got arrested and you can't do it. So then I went over to, then I went to Tom's, and they said the same thing. And Rainbow said the same thing. They went and got all of our food. But then that was the last day they ever did that because I told them, no, we're just continuing, and they just lied to you. And then Art Agnos assigned Cecil Williams to be the Commission on Outdoor Food Service, right? And then after about 6 months, he ruled it's immoral to serve food outside to homeless people. And so then a week later, oddly enough, he had his annual chicken dinner in the Panhandle. But at the same time, when at some point we needed to tell the health department in that long ordeal that was going on with that we had a commercial kitchen, which we did not have. So but the health department had given the health permit to Martin DePore's Soup Kitchen. They agreed to say we cook there. And that way then we got around that problem. And that's where the anarchist coffee house used to be for years. And I was friends with Charlie and
Martin DePore is still there serving food for sure.
yeah. So that's another connection to my girlfriend, Kathleen and I, is when she went to college at at San Jose State, she learned that there was this Catholic work. She grew up Catholic, so she thought, oh, there's a Catholic worker house, and she started going there to help cook and serve food. And then eventually she dropped out of school just to do that and to do this. And then she ended up down in El Salvador and all that. And so we've had really tight connection with Catholic workers, which is an interesting thing because Dorothy Day described herself as a Catholic anarchist. And there's actually a whole Christian anarchist movement. And I met like the Christian anarchist movement in the Philippines and such amazing people. And traditionally, American and European anarchists tend to be against the hierarchy of God, which makes a lot of sense. No masters, no God is a slogan, right? And but I find that being an anarchist, it's not a problem to be open-minded, to be working with, with people that are not overtly racist or overtly want to kill people, or like I don't think we'd be working with anybody in some fundamentalist church necessarily or something like that, right? But we cook at St. Joe's House in Manhattan for years now, and we served since '89. We've been serving at the chessboard at Tompkins Square Park. Maybe even '88. We started serving there, and we've been there every Sunday ever since at 4:30. And we cooked down the street at St. Joseph's House, which is a Catholic worker house. But that's just, and then we worked with the Catholic worker in Las Vegas, Nevada, before we go out to the Nevada test site. That'd be our last stop to get more provisions and stuff. And then we come out back from the test site, and we bring back some pots and pans that we borrowed from them. And so we've had a lot of connections to Catholic workers, and so there is that. But the Glide one, Glide, it's an interesting thing when you want to know about the history of San Francisco. Glide was the pastor, and his congregation was the pastor of the Phil Burton machine. That's why he's alive, right? And Jim Jones and the People's Temple was the soup kitchen of the left. And interestingly, most of the parishioners, at least when I was in San Francisco, were white at Glide Memorial Church, and all the parishioners at the People's Temple were black. The pastor at the People's Temple was white, and the pastor at Glide was black. It was a weird thing. And I was friends with some of the parishioners. I was friends with Terrence Hallinan, and I had some disputes with his father for sure. Do you remember Terrence Hallinan?
The name is familiar.
Yeah, so Terrence was a supervisor for a long time. He was a lawyer. He had some weird people that he represented, and if his Wikipedia page trashes him completely. It's not, most of what's on his Wikipedia page is completely inaccurate, which is the case. Wikipedia page is really. But anyway, he was the district attorney, and he got defeated by Kamala Harris in a trick.
Right. So he was like kind of he was to the left of Kamala Harris, and then the Burton machine
put her in. So Willie Brown was Burton machine. I'm Scott Wiener, Burton machine. The new guy, what's his name? Burton machine. Breed, Burton machine.
Lurie, yeah.
Everybody's a Burton machine. You don't allow to be in. You mean to take the head of the Republican Party and make him a Democratic mayor of your city? That tells you something. Right?
Yeah.
So the Getty part of the mission.
Right.
So
Newsom and brought up by the Gettys.
The other thing that's to shows how the politics is so hardcore in San Francisco. So when the Progressive Party won the mayor's race in San Francisco, and I think Eugene Debs was running for president at the time, but then
this is way back.
This is Sutro, and he but he gets bought out right away and becomes a scumbag. And so if you go to Sutro Heights above Seacliff, there's like that big park, and you see sometimes some little statues around the edge of it. that are broken up.
So this is the late 1800s.
Yep.
Obviously, Sutro Tower,
Yep, and all
well known.
Sucho Bass and all that
Yep.
stuff. So he had a mansion above Sucho Bass, above Cliff, Seal Rock and all that. What's that? What was that restaurant that's there? Cliff House. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I used to have my anniversary dinner there every year. But anyway, so the people of San Francisco were so pissed off at him, they went there and burned his mansion down. And that's why there's just these kind of broken up monuments on what used to be those front yards.
Right, the relics. Yeah.
Yep. That
Out
was
by
his,
the beach.
yep, that's where the people were like, fuck you, you're supposed to be um progressive and you sold us out to the bankers. And but
Love to hear it's the same fight.
yeah, yeah, it's
Sometimes
amazing.
it's comforting to know, like, okay, yeah, we're not the first to face.
Yeah, and then I have a good friend from the Black Panthers there. You know, Keela Nacha, she passed away recently, but yeah, there was always the White Panthers and then the food conspiracy shootout over on 24th and in the Mission District, and then you had the Black Panthers and all and then you had the CIA and FBI like running trips out of I remember like there's a great book that shows Chief Nadler, I think is his name. He was the chief of police, and then his daughter became his supervisor. And there's a book showing how he organized the heroin distribution in '68 in the Haight-Ashbury to kill
Oh,
Summer of Love. When I was like doing food up bombs at the corner of Haight and Stanion, the police were running a crack. They were selling crack there. They had undercover cops that would sell crack there, and then they would bust like anybody selling pot. It was kind of crazy, and and they do that here. They have like the cops had a whole drug operation at this corner at Laurel and Pacific in Santa Cruz, and ran it for years, and it depressed the real estate market in that area, and then they busted it because they were them, and they just moved to a different area of town, and then now there's all these high-rise luxury apartments there, right?
these things are still happening today with, people getting sold fentanyl. We know, like cases even where the government went so far as to take to court people like the ex-president of the San Jose police officers.
Yeah, Susanna, and I forget her last name, but yeah.
Yeah, Segovia. Yeah,
Segovia, right, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, she's one of the largest fentanyl. And there's a guy in Santa Cruz that's supposed to be running the homeless stuff, and he's the guy that distributes the fentanyl to the homeless here, and he worked for the city.
It's pretty maddening. It can be maddening. Like, I don't know how you stay sane holding all of these things in over time where power is just lying and trying to gaslight people into thinking that they didn't just see that, they didn't just witness that.
Yeah, I mean this Sean Diddy and Epstein thing, and there's dozens of others such exact things happening, right?
For sure.
There's a whole banking industry probably thing going on. There's like an education related trip going, science, every community of people, they've got their blackmail operations happening. And then the most obvious one is money. So like when they wanted to kill Black Lives Matter, what do? They just give some foundation assign some people to be the head of Black Lives Matter, and then give them all the money, and then there's no Black Lives Matter anymore.
Right.
Like our Black Lives Matter here in Santa Cruz is controlled by the Santa Cruz Police Department. Why are they the head of Black Lives Matter? Right?
Yep.
And so you do that. Whereas that's one of the things that I think is the most dangerous about Food Not Bombs, and why it's going to it's successful, and it's because we don't get foundation money. We're grassroots. We're not focused on money. We're focused on volunteering and whatever donations you get, but mostly recovered food and stuff, right? And we can't be controlled because there's no what you. And I've been careful to make sure it's beautiful that I intentionally, and all 8 of us that started Food Not Bombs right from the beginning, we're like, we can never have a charismatic leader where they can take the personality of that person and then either make up stuff about them or compromise them. So it's the old trick of Saddam Hussein, right? He's not Iraq, but Iraq, he's a bad guy, blah, 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 blah. So let's bomb the crap out of them and take over their country and make it a failed state. Or Noriega. He wasn't the only one, he was a CIA asset selling coke and out of, running coke operations out of Panama and bombing El Salvador and all that for the US. But then you could say, oh, Panama's bad because Noriega's bad and he had red underwear and he found, coke in his house, right? Or it's that kind of thing. Or Martin Luther King or any Malcolm X. You got to stay away from having a charismatic leader because then you can either shoot him and then kill your movement, or you can, smear them, or whatever, or you can pay them off.
You have a Substack.
Yeah, I have a blog called anarchistcook.blog.
I'll link to this in the show notes. I did want to ask, so you wrote the follow-up to the Anarchist Cookbook and have some recipes in there for people who might be needing to serve a large number of people in one sitting. Wondering if you have a favorite recipe that you would let people know about.
Oh, wow. One of the ones that I find, I actually did a couple of tours like this, where I took the first pirate radio transmitter that Stephen Dunifer made, and I traveled all over North America, and I would make tofu spread. And that way I didn't need to have a venue where I was not allowed to use fire or, a stove. I just show up, right? And I would tell like a comedy routine. I'd wear my chef's hat and my chef's coat, and I would do like a Julia Child's cooking demonstration with the history of food not bombs and the theory of anarchy.
Wow.
Now, the story of the Anarchist Cookbook rewriting, for years, people would buy William Powell's Anarchist Cookbook thinking it was mine, because I've been pretty good about making sure that my name is not like some kind of headline name. So they don't know whether I'm William Powell or I'm Keith McHenry. So they would buy it, and then they'd call me or my publisher pissed off that there was no vegan recipes in the book. It was just how to make bombs and poison people and booby traps and stuff like that. So then Chaz Buffet, who's from San Francisco, really, that's where we became friends. He owned Typesetting, etc., and he was part of, what's his name? He had a Processed World. He spent a lot of time hanging out with them. Chris Carlson. And so anyway, I would, we decided one day, he said, we should just rewrite the book about anarchism, because the original one has nothing about anarchism. In fact, the preface of it is written by this wacky dude who's in the Revolutionary Communist Party, like kind of a Maoist group in Manhattan. And all he did is he went to the library on 42nd Street, the main library in Manhattan, and just wrote down crap that made him look bad, because his goal was to avoid the draft and didn't want to go to Vietnam. And he called it the Anarchist Cookbook, and was hoping that would be enough to keep him out of Vietnam, and it worked. But then these right-wing psychos started publishing it, like from Texas, and I think at one point they sued each other over who owned it. So I started writing William Powell, asking him, he said, look, I want to rewrite the book, and I want to use your denunciation of your book as the preface of my book. Chris Hedges was being attacked by people that were claiming they were Antifa. That's an interesting psychological thing. Anti-fascism or Antifa was originally a German movement to protect dorms of Turkish workers, right? And so in America, we took the name also, but then it became, at some point, it was infiltrated even in, it actually was mobilized by the feds in Seattle, right? Because they were getting really freaked out that Direct Action Network was having so much success. So then they mobilized these people to break windows at Starbucks and at Nike's, right? And now there's like even white papers that you can, about how that worked for the law enforcement community. And then I had a couple of friends that ended up doing the prison after that, who were legitimate Food Not Bombs kids that just, because there's a certain, we had a black bloc in '92 in San Francisco at the Food Not Bombs World Gathering that took the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria floats off the floats and ran through the city during the the Columbus Day parade on Columbus Ave, and so that was kind of a black bloc, and that's I was connected to them and everything. Probably if you live in the Bay Area, everybody that was in that. But anyway, so the yeah, it definitely got corrupted, and now you can see that it's being used in the same way that the way Hitler's people used the brown shirts versus Rosa Luxemburg and them, and they infiltrate Luxemburg's group, and they control the brown shirts, and then they have these fights on the streets. So you have the same things happening now with the Feds run the Patriot, the Proud Boys and all that stuff, and then they infiltrate Antifa, now they're calling it Antifa, which is a great way to make it no longer anti-fascist. It's like a linguistic thing because we call it Antifa for like 40 years, and now all of a sudden it becomes Antifa. You can hear Amy Goodman called it Antifa for the first 30 years, and now she calls it Antifa. So that's why having like these decentralized, non-hierarchical, autonomous groups that are just in your community makes it a little bit more and where you're making your decisions by meeting one another rather than online.
Wanted to ask if there's anything that you're working on that you might want to plug.
Well, I'm trying to, I have a 750,000 word memoir.
Wow.
And I'm realizing after talking to AK Press and PM Press, memoirs, number one, are not very popular, particularly by not famous people. But
I don't know about that.
Yeah, well, everybody says memoirs are not that popular. But it's interesting. I had a literary agent, but all of her contacts were apparently Zionists. And the genocide was doing real fine. She'd get hooked, thinking I could get this publisher, that publisher, the other publisher, and then the genocide started. And then I was not quiet about being opposed to the genocide. So then all that happens is then they go to social media and go, nope, this guy's not getting published. And that was the end of that. So she dropped me after October 7th, like 2 months or 3 months after that. So then I went to AK Press and them, and there's like, it's just too long. And so now I'm trying to make it smaller. I've had it edited 3 times, and I've had a lot of people read the beta copies and stuff. But so that's one of my main things I want to do.
750,000 words is, I think, the book that I worked on. I mean, it's certainly under 100K.
Yeah, it turns out that 150,000 words is a 300-page book.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So I'm trying to get it down to, actually, I have a version now that is 147,000 words. I spent over 10 years writing it, and I tried to make it a piece of literature. That's the one big project. The other is, I think that's the main thing I'm doing, other than continuing to do Food Not Bombs in Santa Cruz and handling all the correspondence that comes and helping people start groups through, phone calls and email and website stuff. And I think like trying to encourage people to not feel hopeless. And then of course, trying to figure out ways to effectively protest the basic fascism that's happening. A general strike would be good, but that is very difficult. And to whether it would happen and work and actually change things. Because that's part of what's going on, right? AI, robotics. Many of the coders writing AI code are now being laid off because AI does writing the code for them. We're actually seeing Tesla employees, but they were manufacturers, people working in Fremont, working on projects over there, getting laid off. He laid off lots and lots of people, and now they eat at Food Not Bombs. I find that interesting. Actually, we have a homeless person that lives in a Tesla, eats with us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, like, because in the past, it's been like, if someone is of use to the government or these corporate entities, Palantir, OpenAI, what have you, they would just hire these developers, these programmers. They've stopped doing that. So I wonder, I mean, I'm not necessarily holding my breath, but it would be amazing if there were more people who are proficient in computer science that would take a more resistant stance rather than, in the past just getting scooped up by your Amazons or OpenAIs. Maybe we'll see more resistance in that area since we have all these people with computer science degrees that are now, like you say, in some cases homeless.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting whether there was a whole bunch of protests yesterday against Palantir. I'm hoping to go to the this AI organization. There's a meeting against AI.
Stop AI, perhaps?
Stop AI, yeah, I'm hoping to go to
Yeah,
Stop
yeah.
AI.
Yeah, they've been on the podcast before.
Yeah, I like those people. I can correspond with them. And yeah, I think that AI is going to be much more dangerous than that. It's not going to be grok and fun pictures online and stuff like that. No, it's the surveillance state and warfare.
A lot of strings in this conversation could be their own episodes.
Yeah. We're only how many hours into it? 2 hours? 3 hours? I should probably go. And I hope I can meet you when I come to town.
Thank you. Thank
you so much for having me. And I've been following you, and I'm really excited that you invited me.
So stoked.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, I'll be in touch once.
Great. Thank you so much. I feel like I met a famous person finally.
No, vice versa.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to the show, and especially thank you to everyone who is contributing over at patreon.com/SadFrancisco. You're making it possible for Sad Francisco to exist. And if you're not already a member, think about joining. Again, it's patreon.com/SadFrancisco.